The man paid for his room 3 weeks in advance. Paid in full. Presidential suite, 14 floors up, overlooking the river. The confirmation email sat in his phone right next to a text from the hospital administrator saying safe travels. Dr. Osei, see you Monday. He wasn't thinking about any of that when he pulled into the Hargrove Grand's parking structure on a Friday evening in late October. He was thinking about whether he'd remembered to pack his blood pressure medication and whether the drive from Atlanta had tightened up his left shoulder the way long drives always did these days. He was 53 years old. His knees reminded him of that every morning. The shoulder reminded him on long drives. Kwame Osei pulled his bag from the trunk of a 7-year-old Volvo. Not the car people expected a cardiothoracic surgeon to drive, but Kwame had never been interested in what people expected, and he walked through the parking structure toward the elevator. He was wearing dark jeans, a plain gray pullover, and a pair of worn New Balance sneakers he'd had for 4 years. His jacket was folded over his arm. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. He looked, in other words, like a man who had driven 6 hours and didn't particularly care what anyone thought about it. The lobby of the Hargrove Grand was the kind of lobby designed to make you feel like money was watching you. Marble floors. A chandelier that probably cost more than most people's cars. A front desk that stretched the full width of the room in dark walnut and brass. It was the kind of place where the carpet was so thick your footsteps disappeared. Kwame Osei's footsteps disappeared into that carpet. He walked to the front desk. There was one guest ahead of him, a woman in a business suit checking in with 2 rolling bags and a laptop case. He stood and waited. Behind the desk stood a man named Hutton. Ray Hutton, front desk manager, 12 years at the Hargrove Grand, a gold nameplate on his lapel, and a manner that had been polished over those 12 years into something that looked exactly like hospitality, but wasn't quite. Ray Hutton had a way of looking at guests that took about half a second and filed them into categories. It wasn't something he thought about, consciously. It was something his eyes did on their own. His eyes did it now. He finished with the woman in the business suit. She took her key cards and rolled toward the elevator. Hutton turned to Kwame Osei. "Can I help you?" 3 words. The same 3 words he'd said to the woman in the business suit. But if you had been standing there, and you were, in a way, because this is the kind of moment that asks you to be present, you would have heard the difference. You would have heard the slight flattening of the tone, the absence of the slight forward lean he'd offered the woman, the way his eyes went from Kwame's face to the bag on his shoulder and back in a way that wasn't welcoming exactly. It was assessing. "Checking in," Kwame said. "Osei, O-S-E-I." Hutton turned to his computer. He typed. His fingers moved the way fingers move when they're not in any particular hurry. "I'm not finding a reservation under that name." Kwame reached into his pocket for his phone. He had the confirmation number memorized, not because he was particularly anxious, but because he was a surgeon, and surgeons learn to memorize the numbers that matter. Our confirmation number is HG447-8821. Hutton typed it in, a pause. "This reservation is for a Kwame Osei. That's me." Another pause. The kind of pause that isn't a pause at all, but a decision being made. "Do you have a credit card on file for incidentals?" "I paid in full. We still require a card for incidentals." "Hotel policy." Kwame pulled out his wallet and placed his Amex Black on the counter. Hutton picked it up, looked at it in the particular way that is not about reading the name but about registering the object, as if he was deciding whether the card matched the man. Hutton ran it, handed it back, turned to his computer again. "The presidential suite is currently unavailable." The lobby wasn't quiet, exactly. There was music somewhere, and the soft sound of rolling luggage and distant conversation, but the space around the front desk felt very still. "I booked that suite 3 weeks ago," Kwame said. "There was a maintenance issue. A pipe. We had to, is it fixed? A beat. The room is unavailable. So it's not fixed. I can offer you a deluxe king on the 9th floor. Same rate." Kwame looked at Hutton for a moment, not with anger, with the particular patience of a man who has encountered this specific kind of thing enough times that his body knows not to spend energy on surprise. "I didn't book a deluxe king," Kwame said. "I booked the presidential suite. I paid for it. I'd like to know when the maintenance issue will be resolved and whether I'll be moved to my actual room." Something shifted in Hutton's expression, just slightly. The professional surface stayed in place, but underneath it something tightened. "Sir, I'm trying to help you. I'm offering you an equivalent room." It's 5 floors lower and half the square footage I reserved. I'd like to speak to a manager. I am the manager. A general manager. Hutton straightened. Mr. Prentice is unavailable this evening. Then I'll wait. Another pause. Then Hutton picked up the phone behind the desk. He spoke quietly, his back slightly angled, the way people angle their backs when they don't want you to hear what they're saying. He set the phone down and turned back with an expression that had been recalibrated, just slightly, in a direction that was no longer trying to look like hospitality. I'm going to need to ask you to take a seat in the lounge area while we sort this out. Kwame didn't move immediately. He looked at the counter. He looked at the key cards in their little paper folder sitting just to Hutton's right, the ones Hutton had not offered him. Then he looked back at Hutton. All right, he said. He sat in the lounge area. It was all low furniture and warm light and magazines nobody reads. He pulled out his phone and opened his email. He found the confirmation. Presidential Suite, HG 4478821. Paid in full 3 weeks ago. Non-refundable. He did not look at his phone like a man who was worried. He looked at it the way a surgeon looks at a scan, with the calm certainty of someone who knows what the image shows. A young man came out from a door behind the front desk. His name was Jonah Ferris, though Kwame didn't know that yet. He was 26, wearing the hotel's uniform, and he had been working the Hargrove Grand for 8 months. His face was the face of a person who has been told to do something he is not sure is right. Jonah Ferris walked to where Kwame was sitting. Sir, he said, Mr. Hutton asked me to let you know that the room situation may take some time to resolve and that we'd be happy to provide complimentary valet parking while you wait. Kwame looked up from his phone. My car's already parked, he said. Right, yes, of course. Jonah Ferris looked down at his shoes for half a second. Then he looked back up. Sir, I wanted to say personally that I'm sorry for the wait. I'm sure we'll get you sorted. There was something genuine in the way he said it. Kwame heard it. Thank you, Kwame said. And he meant it. Jonah Ferris went back through the door. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Kwame sat. He read emails. He checked a patient chart. There was a man named Aldrich Beaumont, 61 years old, valve replacement scheduled for Monday morning, and Kwame had been thinking about that aortic anatomy since Tuesday. He made a note in the file. The lobby continued around him, guests arriving and departing, rolling luggage on marble, the chandelier doing its expensive thing overhead. At the 30-minute mark, a man in a suit came out of the elevator. Not from behind the desk. From the elevator. This was notable because it meant he had been called down from upstairs, which meant Hutton had told someone something that prompted this man to come down. The man's name was Victor Alden. He was the Hargrove Grand's head of security, though his card said Director of Guest Safety because hotels in this bracket don't use words that sound like problems. Victor Alden was 50 years old, broad through the shoulders, and walked with the measured pace of a man who thought his presence alone was sufficient explanation for things. He walked to the lounge area. He stood near Kwame, not directly in front of him, slightly off to the side in the way that is intended to make a person look up. Kwame looked up. Mr. Osei, Victor Alden said. I'm the Director of Guest Safety. We've had a report of a disturbance at the front desk. Kwame sat back slightly. A disturbance, a guest complaint. I'm the guest, Kwame said. And I have a complaint. I have a confirmed reservation for the presidential suite, paid in full, and I'm being told the room is unavailable without any clear explanation or timeline. I understand that can be frustrating. I'm not frustrated, Kwame said. And he wasn't. He was something more careful than frustrated. I'm waiting for the general manager, which I was told I could do. Mr. Prentice isn't on property this evening. That's the second time I've been told that. Is there a manager on duty I can speak with? Victor Alden shifted his weight. Mr. Osei, I want to be direct with you. We have other guests in the lobby, and we'd prefer to handle this. I'm sitting in a chair, Kwame said. I'm not speaking above a normal conversational volume. I'm not touching anything or anyone. What specifically is the issue? There was a silence. In that silence, 3 things happened. A couple crossing the lobby glanced over. A woman checking her phone near the elevator looked up, and Jonah Ferris, coming through the door behind the front desk with a tray of something, stopped and stood very still. Sir, Victor Alden said, and now his tone had shifted. Not drastically, but enough. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Where? We'd like to have this conversation in a more private space. I'd like to have it here, Kwame said, with witnesses. Another silence longer this time. Then Victor Alden straightened. He touched the radio on his hip. Didn't use it, just touched it, the way a person touches something to remind you it's there. Mr. Osei, I want you to understand that we have the right to refuse service to any guest who is causing a disruption. I want you to understand, Kwame said quietly, that I have a contract with this hotel. I paid $1,400 for 3 nights. I have the confirmation in my hand. He held up the phone. I've asked twice to speak to a manager. I've sat quietly for 31 minutes. If you're telling me that asking for what I paid for constitutes a disruption, I would like that in writing. Victor Alden stared at him. Because, Kwame continued in the same quiet voice, I'm a black man in an expensive hotel asking for the room I reserved and paid for in advance. And I want to be very clear that I know exactly what's happening here, and so do you, and so does everyone in this lobby who's been watching for the last few minutes. The couple who had glanced over had stopped walking. The woman near the elevator had put her phone away. Victor Alden said, Sir, I'm asking you, what exactly are you asking me to do? And that was the moment. Not a loud moment, not a dramatic one, in the way the word dramatic usually means, but the kind of moment that has weight, the kind that once it happens you can feel had been coming for a while. What happened next happened quickly. Jonah Ferris put the tray down on the front desk. He walked out from behind it, which was not something he was supposed to do, and he crossed the lobby to where Victor Alden and Kwame Osei were standing. He was 26 years old, and he had been working there 8 months, and he looked like someone who had decided something and didn't know yet if it was the right thing, but was going to do it anyway. Mr. Alden, he said. Alden looked at him. The guest's room is available, Jonah Ferris said. I checked the maintenance log. The work order was closed yesterday. The room is ready. Victor Alden turned very slowly. Ferris, I also pulled the reservation record. This is a confirmed suite reservation, paid in full, non-refundable. We have no grounds to refuse check-in. He looked at Kwame Osei when he said the next part. I'm sorry for the wait, sir. I should have said this sooner. The lobby held very still. Victor Alden looked at Jonah Ferris for a long moment. It was a look that had a whole conversation in it, about hierarchy and consequences and the specific kind of trouble a 26-year-old staff member invites when he contradicts his superior in the middle of a lobby. Jonah Ferris received that look and held it and did not look away. Ray Hutton had appeared behind the front desk. He was watching. Kwame Osei stood up from the lounge chair. He picked up his bag. He straightened his pullover, the plain gray one, the one he'd been wearing for 6 hours of driving. He was 53 years old and his shoulder still ached, and he hadn't shaved, and he drove a 7-year-old Volvo that he liked because it was reliable, and he'd never been particularly interested in what people expected. He walked to the front desk. Ray Hutton looked at him. Something in that look was different now. Not apologetic, not quite, because apology would have required an admission, and the mind protects itself from those. But different. The assessment was still there, but it had recalibrated. It was working with different information now. Your key cards, Hutton said. His voice was level. Kwame took them. The presidential suite is on the 14th floor, Hutton said. Overlooks the river. Checkout is noon on Monday. I know, Kwame said. I read the confirmation. He walked to the elevator. Jonah Ferris followed, not because he'd been assigned to, but because he was in some unofficial and uncalculated way escorting him, making a small visual fact of his choice. In the elevator, Jonah said, I'm sorry, Dr. Osei, about all of it. Kwame looked at him. How'd you know my title? I looked up your reservation. Your full profile is in the system. You stayed here 9 years ago. Business trip. He paused. You left a very nice tip for housekeeping. Kwame let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You checked my history to confirm a maintenance log? I wanted to make sure I had everything right before I said anything. The elevator moved upward. 14 floors. The city was visible in the gap between the closing doors before they sealed. The Friday evening darkness, the lights below. You're going to have some trouble Monday morning, Kwame said. Probably, Jonah said. Do you want me to speak to Mr. Prentice before I leave? Jonah Ferris thought about it. He was 26 and he had decided something, and he was not fully certain what it was going to cost him. If you wouldn't mind, he said. I wouldn't mind, Kwame said. The elevator opened on 14. The hallway was wide and carpeted and quiet. Here is what Ray Hutton did not know when Kwame Osei walked through the lobby that evening, and what Victor Alden did not know, and what the Hargrove Grand's polished surface machinery of hospitality did not know. Kwame Osei had grown up 40 minutes from this hotel. He'd been born in a house 3 neighborhoods over, the son of a Ghanaian immigrant who worked nights at a printing company, and a woman from Alabama who had taught 3rd grade for 31 years. He had gone to the state university on a partial scholarship and worked the other part through 2 jobs, and had graduated with a degree in biology and then again with a medical degree, and then a residency at Johns Hopkins, and then a fellowship in Boston, and then 37 years of waking up early and operating on people's hearts. 37 years. He had held beating hearts in his hands. He had made calls on bypass timing at 2 a.m., with a resident at his elbow and a patient's life on a clock. He had given families news that broke them and news that brought them back from breaking. He had built, over those 37 years, a reputation that had nothing to do with what car he drove or what jacket he wore or whether he'd shaved. On Monday morning, he was going to open the chest of a man named Aldrich Beaumont, 61 years old, 3-vessel disease, and repair a heart that without that surgery had a less than 40% chance of lasting another 2 years. Aldrich Beaumont was, as it happened, Victor Alden's uncle. This is not a detail Kwame knew at the time. He found it out later when Prentice told him, embarrassed and over-apologetic in the way people get when consequence has arrived faster than expected. Victor Alden had found it out Sunday evening when his mother called to tell him his uncle was at Emory, about to go into surgery, and the surgeon's name the hospital gave her was a name Victor Alden had seen on a reservation the night before. People like to talk about the moment when truth arrives. They like it to be loud, the dropped plates, the gasped revelation, the moment the whole room turns. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it is quieter than that. Sometimes it is a phone call on a Sunday evening and a name you recognize and a silence on the line while you understand what you have done and who you have done it to and what it says about the inside of you that it happened at all. Victor Alden sat with that for a long time. Kwame Osei was already asleep by then on the 14th floor, the river moving dark and slow below the window. His shoulder had loosened up. He had ordered room service, a club sandwich, unremarkable, and eaten it in the chair by the window and watched the city do its Friday night things and thought about the aortic anatomy he'd be navigating in 2 days and then stopped thinking about it because you have to stop sometime, and gone to bed. He slept well. He always slept well before a surgery. Some people found that strange. Kwame found it logical. You prepare what you can prepare, and then you rest, because a tired surgeon is a liability, and he had never been willing to be a liability to the people who needed him. Monday morning, the surgery went fine. 5 hours and 11 minutes. Beaumont's heart was back in normal sinus rhythm by 9 a.m. He would spend 3 days in the ICU, and then a week in the step-down unit, and then go home to his family, who would fuss over him in the way families fuss when they have come close to losing someone and the relief is still too fresh to be calm about. Victor Alden was in the waiting room when Kwame came out in scrubs to speak to the family. He was sitting with Beaumont's wife and his sister, his mother, and he looked like a man who had spent the weekend carrying something heavy. Kwame told the family that the surgery was successful, that Aldrich Beaumont had a strong heart, and they'd gotten him before the damage was irreversible, and he'd need to take it slow, but he was going to be all right. Beaumont's wife started crying. His mother put her hand over her mouth. Victor Alden stood up. He was not a man accustomed to diminishment. He was 50 years old, and broad through the shoulders, and had spent 30 years making himself the kind of presence that rooms made space for. He stood up anyway. "Dr. Osei," he said. Kwame looked at him. "I owe you an apology." The waiting room was doing its waiting room things around them, the soft sounds, the muted television, the particular quality of hospital air that is never quite comfortable. "You do," Kwame said. "I treated you badly. Friday night. I had no grounds." Victor Alden stopped. He was not a man who found words easy in moments like this, and he was finding them less easy than usual. "I know it doesn't make it right." "I know it doesn't." "It doesn't," Kwame said. Alden nodded. "But your uncle is going to be okay," Kwame said. "That has nothing to do with what happened Friday. I want you to understand that." Victor Alden looked at him. "I don't need you to owe me anything," Kwame said. "That's not what I'm here for. Your uncle needed a surgeon, and I'm a surgeon, and that's what happened. That's all that happened." He paused. "What you do with Friday is your own business. I'd suggest you do something with it." He left Victor Alden standing in the waiting room with that. Jonah Ferris, as it turned out, had not been fired. He had been written up. There was a formal note in his file and a conversation with Prentice that he described later as uncomfortable but fair. Ray Hutton had been reassigned to a different shift, for reasons the hotel declined to specify publicly. Kwame found that out from Prentice, who had called to apologize in the over-thorough way of someone managing a liability. He listened, accepted the apology briefly, declined the offer of a complimentary future stay, and asked that any goodwill gesture be directed instead to the hotel's housekeeping staff, whom he'd always found to be the most professional people in any hotel. Prentice said he'd see what he could do. Kwame drove back to Atlanta on Monday evening. The shoulder was fine. He'd remembered the blood pressure medication. The Volvo made a new small sound somewhere around Macon that he'd need to get looked at, and he made a mental note and then forgot it before he got home because there was a chart to review for Tuesday and a call with a resident and the particular decompression of driving at night with the radio low. He parked in his garage. He sat in the car for a moment after he turned it off, the way you sometimes do after a long day when the stillness of the car is a different thing than the stillness of the house. He thought about Beaumont's heart, about the moment in the OR when it had found its rhythm again. That particular moment, the one that still caught him after all these years, the one that made all the rest of it make sense. That moment is why you do it. Not the title, not the reputation, not the money. The moment the heart decides to keep going. 53 years old. His knees would remind him in the morning, but the work was good. He got out of the car and went inside.